Good evening and welcome to our latest installment of our Unmasked series. My name is Afeni Grace. I am the program coordinator for the Harvey B. Gantt Center. Tonight, we discuss the meaning of a true path towards protect and serve, as we hear perspectives from Black figures in the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department of both the past and the present who hold positions of varying levels. Before we dive in, please be sure to click that subscribe button below the screen for updates on all future Gantt Center programs. Also, be sure to visit us at ganttcenter.org to understand who we are as the Gantt Center, what we do, and how you can support us. We have also included currently in our YouTube chat a 2-minute audience survey. Please click the link to take the survey. It's very short, and if you haven't had the chance to complete it before this conversation, take the time to do so now before we dive deeper into the conversation. Of course, we love to see such great audience engagement, so please feel free to use that YouTube chat for any questions or comments that you have throughout the evening. We will address the audience survey results and audience questions in the second half of the program. And we also are very happy to welcome back Glenn Berkins. He's the founder and publisher of Q City Metro, Charlotte's premier news, business, and culture platform for the Black community. Good to see you, Glenn. Welcome back.
Thank you, Afeni. Glad to be back. The killing of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer unleashed a torrent of protests, the likes of which our nation had not seen since the 1960s. Shouts of defund the police rose from every corner of our nation. But for all the protest, our nation is far from united on a pathway forward. A Pew Research Center survey in June of more than 4,700 adults found the nation deeply divided. While nearly 60% of those surveyed said the nation's law enforcement officers do a good or excellent job at protecting people from crime, fewer than 40% agreed that police forces do a good job of A, using the right amount of force, B, treating racial and ethnic groups equally, and C, holding officers accountable when misconduct occurs. Defund the police? Not so fast. More than 70% of those surveyed said they would like to see funding for their local police departments held steady or even increased. This evening in the Gantt Center's Unmasked series, we take up the topic of redefining the term protect and serve. How can communities play a deeper and more meaningful role in deciding how they are policed? Joining us today is a panel of guests that includes CMPD Officer Jasmine Nevins. Officer Nevins is a native of Charlotte. While in high school, she gained an interest in law enforcement, sparked by a job shadowing a CMPD detective. She got a Bachelor of Science degree in criminal justice in 2014 from North Carolina Central University. In her spare time, she enjoys working out, horseback riding, and traveling. Her faith keeps her grounded, and she considers her mother, father, and brother her support system. Good morning, good afternoon, Jasmine.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely, thank you for having me.
We also have with us today former CMPD detective, Keith Way. Former Detective Way is a Charlotte native as well, who graduated from the Charlotte Police Academy as a member of the 90th class recruit class. His first law enforcement assignment was with the Charlotte Park Rangers before transferring over to the Charlotte Police Department just before the merger of the city and county police departments. Over the next 24 years, he saw assignments as a community coordinator in 3 districts. He was also law enforcement liaison for a youth program and athletic director for the Police Athletic League or PAL. He spent the final 9 years of his career as domestic violence detective before he retired. Welcome, Keith Way.
Thank you.
And finally, we have CMPD Chief Johnny Jennings. Chief Jennings was sworn in on July 1st. He is described as an innovative and forward-thinking public service who uses strategic and technology solutions to positively impact operations and produce data-driven results. Chief Jennings joined the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department as a member of the 100th and 108th recruit class in 1992. He has held a variety of positions and ranks throughout the organization, and I'm not going to even attempt to name them all because it would take us the rest of the show, but trust me, he has been around. Some of those include Sergeant over Criminal Intelligence, Patrol Sergeant, and Captain over the North Tryon Division. He was Major over Intelligence, and it goes on and on. Welcome, Chief Jennings.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me tonight.
Absolutely. I want to start with you, Chief Jennings. As I said in the introduction, there's a great conversation going on now about police reform. What types of conversations are going on within CMPD that might mirror what's happening in the community?
Yeah, that's great. Great question, because I think the first thing in what one of my jobs is to make sure that our police are not in a mode of us against them, and to let them know that a lot of the stuff that's being discussed and a lot of the outrage that's being seen is only to make us better. So my staff and all the way down, and we're trying to relay that information to say that there's going to be some changes within policing, not just in CMPD, but across the country. And we should hold on and embrace that and look forward to what we're going to do. And you've seen some of the core values that I'm going to start instilling, and one being community collaboration, where we're going to allow for the community to give us input on how they would like to be policed. And I think that's important.
How are those conversations going? Are you getting pushback from your officers? Are they accepting of the fact that change is necessary and in fact is coming?
You know, I have to admit that we did an internal survey, and it's probably the largest survey that we've had as far as responses are concerned. And I was expecting to get exactly what you were saying, a lot of pushback, or, hey, we're old school police, we have to stick together. There are a lot of great comments and great responses that even I was surprised that a lot of people are looking forward to the change. They're anxious about what that change is going to look like. And they are aware that we have to do something different than what we've been doing.
Officer Jennings, you are a current officer. Talk to us a little about a typical day for you. What is a typical day on patrol like? What would you like for us to know that the public might not understand about your job?
So typically whenever I get to work, I go to the locker room, put on my uniform, and then I report to what's called roll call. In roll call, we go over things that are currently going on within the division as well as the city. And that is given by the shift sergeant. After that, go out to our cars, sign on, and then from that point, any and everything can happen. So there is no, quote, routine day for a patrol officer. It kind of varies, and we're at the whims of the public and of our 911 calls. So.
You said in your bio, and I'm not sure I read this part, that you live by the golden rule, and that shapes how you do your job. Talk to us just a little about that.
So my mother and father raised me to treat others as I would want to be treated myself. And even beyond that, going through normal day-to-day duties, whether it be work or whether it be personal life, I often look at other people as if they're family members, or, even on a traffic stop, I look at the person behind the wheel as maybe my dad, or my mom, or my brother, or aunt, or uncle. And I just kind of try to remember that at the end of the day, this is somebody's mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle. child. So that's kind of what what my parents instilled in me, was just to treat all people with respect, and to treat others as I would want to be treated.
Okay. Officer Way, even though you are retired, I hope you don't mind if I still call you officer.
Yeah.
As Officer Niven said, my mom taught me to be respectful as well. So I'm going to call you Officer Way if you don't mind.
That's fine.
You're looking at this from a distance. You're looking at what is happening from a distance. You've served a long career in law enforcement. Now you're retired. What are you seeing? How has your career shaped your thinking now as a former law enforcement officer?
I came through a time when it was a difference in policing. I started when it was a revolver and 18 bullets. Now we're seeing more guns on the street. We're seeing more violence. But just the evolution of our city. You know, George Washington once called Charlotte the most trifling city ever seen in America, in the United States at that time. And now we look at Charlotte as one of the fastest growing cities in the country. For me, what I'm looking at is my city's growing and the growing pains that comes with it. You know, we've had a lot of growing pains with that. And, you know, when you retire, you want to jump in the fight, but that's not my fight anymore. You know, I really want to ask Chief Jennings, can I put on my gloves again? But nah, I'm good. But, you know, it's really the contact that I have with officers today. 99% of them are good. They're good officers. They have a huge task at hand with the shortage and things like that, and they do a relatively good job. It's just in my time, I came from a smaller city. I remember when the border was Billy Graham Parkway. So we didn't have a big city. We didn't have a lot of square miles to patrol, but now, you know, we're a major city, and with that comes major growing pains. So I sit back and I watch, and I'm just in amazement.
Speaking of good officers versus bad officers, one of the things I gave the Pew Center results in my introduction. One of the things that the nation consistently ranked police forces low on was their ability to hold bad police officers accountable, or hold officers accountable when they commit misconduct. Why is that? Why is that so difficult? And I will throw that out to all three of you.
Well, for me, it's not so much of a problem as compared to other departments where you have those unions who stand behind officer misconduct. I've worked with officers, they were there one day and the next day they're gone. So, you know, the issue we have in Charlotte is not as bad as some of the other cities. And like I say, you know, we don't have those unions that stand behind officers who get fired. The union will get them the job back, or the union will go to court to get them their job back. Here in Charlotte, you know, our department, we've had our share of what we call knuckleheads, if that's the word I can use. But normally they don't last. They just don't last. They normally run themselves off, or they do something in which, you know, the command staff will point them in a direction. And with the system we have in place that's notifiers, we have a system in place now to where they can tell before an officer gets to a certain point. And that's really some cutting edge technology that Charlotte has that a lot of other departments are starting to adopt as well.
Chief, would you like to address that question?
Yeah, absolutely. And Officer Way is exactly right. We do have one of the most robust early intervention systems in the United States, and we're one of 6 departments that the University of Chicago paired with to create that. And I could speak an hour on it, but I'm not going to waste the time on that. But I can tell you what a lot of people don't realize is that your police chief does not have the authority to fire someone or to get rid of an officer. Officers are granted, which is not necessarily a bad thing, the due process to go to civil service. So what I can do as a chief is cite someone for termination, and then they can go to civil service to have a hearing to get their job back, which sometimes that does occur. Most of the time, a lot of times civil service does concur with our recommendations, but officers have to have the due process. We have to be able to screen them as they come in to make sure we're getting the right ones, and that's the most effective way. So that, as Keith put it, there are knuckleheads in every agency, every corporation. To be able to identify them quickly and to mitigate any type of situations that they might get into is important to us, and that's what we're always going to try to do.
Officer Nevins, we hear about the thin blue line, which is a way of saying police officers protect police officers. Does that exist?
To a certain extent, it does, because whenever I joined the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, I gained a whole nother family, in a sense. However, I don't believe that officers should protect other officers when they know something is wrong, unethical, immoral, or illegal.
Let's talk just a little about police reform. We hear cries now to defund the police. That ranges from everything from people who believe police departments should be abolished to people who believe that we should redirect some of the money currently going to police departments to perhaps social services, other agencies that might do some of the work that police departments are currently doing. Chief Jennings, if you could defund, reform, whichever way you choose to say it, CMPD, if you could jettison some responsibilities that the department currently has, are there any at all you think might be better done by some social service department or some other agency?
Now, I'm going to be biased in that because I'll always say we do it best. So, but yeah, you're absolutely right. When you talk about defunding the police, there's so many definitions out there that you have to really get an understanding of when someone says that, what does that person mean by it? So across the country, and there's been other police chiefs nationwide that have said that the police are asked to do too much. There are some things that people have looked at as far as social services being able to respond to certain situations, particularly someone in having a behavioral health or mental health crisis, who is the best person to respond to something like that. So I can think of all kinds of scenarios where that would be a dangerous situation and something that does not need to be taken out of the hands of the police. But also look at other programs and events that we do that I've said all along, if that is going to be taken from us and the funding is taken from us, I also want to make sure that the integrity of that is upheld the way that we do it, and it's done better, if not just as good as the police department does.
For example?
No, for example, I've looked at something like electronic monitoring. Is that necessarily something that the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department needs to be doing, or is that another entity such as the Sheriff's Office, probation, parole, something like that? So if that were to go away from CMPD along with the funding, I want to make sure that it's still upheld to the integrity that Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police does.
One of the things that I hear people say might be better served by social workers, counselors, whatever, are things like domestic violence calls. But I've heard from officers that those can be some of the most dangerous calls you all go out on. And in fact, I believe, I can't remember the city, but there were 2 officers killed either this week or last week who went out on a domestic violence call.
Yes.
So for Officer Nevins or Officer Way, would you care to talk at all about that?
Yes, so I do believe that after the initial investigation, that yes, it is okay for some sort of social worker or counselor to come in and maybe kind of be on call or on standby. But we do kind of also have those policies and practice in place to where counselors can come out on scene. But as you mentioned before, yes, domestic violence calls for service, or even simple domestic disputes where no assault has occurred yet, are typically the most dangerous calls for service that we go on. So to put a civilian or a counselor or a therapist or a social worker in a situation like that could bring about additional issues.
Anyone else want to touch on that?
Also, to piggyback on what Officer Niven said, when we're dealing with domestic violence, being a domestic violence detective, there's other things that you have to look at. We have to figure out who's the predominant aggressor. There's so many different little nuances that people want to just place on domestic violence that it's a catch-all. Nothing we do is catch-all, but with domestic violence, it's a very unique crime. There's time frames that have to be met, and they are really, really violent. I've been on calls where the actual victim turned on me. So it's kind of hard to put a civilian in such a volatile situation. And just because we have the situation under control, at any given time, that switch can flip on. But for me, and having to do the paperwork associated with it, I'm just not sold that a civilian could do the complexity of the paperwork that comes with it, for the presentation of the case. It's a very complex case, and that's one that I would not agree with. Plus, domestic violence is my passion. I don't know if you read, but I actually wrote a paper that was published on domestic violence, and domestic violence is my passion. And that's just one that present, former, you'll never have me to agree that change needs to be made.
Frederick Douglass had the famous saying, and I'll just paraphrase, that power concedes nothing without a fight.
Yep.
Can any of you foresee police departments in this country giving up their authority and giving up a measure of their authority and working more collaborative with communities?
Well, from my standpoint, I was in the second group of coordinators. And when we police, we didn't really police using police action. It was a lot of no police action taken. The cooperation, the collaboration, and the communication that we had with our neighborhoods, a lot of times we didn't have to, there was no guns used, not a lot of handcuffs used. The information that was flowing to us from the neighborhood, it was better than a paid informant. But it has been done and it can be done again. The question is whether we lose the disconnect and how do we get back there?
When did you retire?
Yeah.
Just for the record.
2017.
Okay. Chief, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I just weigh in on that. I don't agree with, as far as giving up any authority or any the authority that we have as policing, but I do believe in listening to how the community wants to be policed and to have that input, because our authority is granted by the citizens and the people. And so my belief has always been that the people should have some say in that. I do also think that we should direct our authority differently. You can hear fireworks if you hear that in the background, I apologize. But we should be able to divert some of our methods of using authority and put more of that into connecting with the community and being able to getting to know people as neighbors and be part of the communities that we're in. Do more of that.
Talk about that a little bit more. I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
Well, we are always, as police officers, seems to be making contact with people when they're having their worst moments. And you mentioned domestic violence, a car accident, someone breaks into your house. or were there to enforce or arrest you or something. But how many people can say they've had contacts with officers when they've been out in their yard doing yard work and an officer just stops by to say hello? Or I mean, we have some of that, but I think it needs to be more. And you hear all the time that the police are part of the community. Well, we have to go out and show that by being present, by letting people know who you are by your first name and not just by your uniform.
Camden, New Jersey has been held up as an example of where true police reform actually happened. I don't know the details of all that happened there, but some of the things that I've read said that the old police department, because of corruption, was effectively disbanded, and it was reinstituted in a different way. Chief, are you familiar with what happened there? Can you talk about that?
If I'm correct, I know there's if it's the correct agency, there's a little bit of where they were reorganized to where everyone in that department basically had to apply for their jobs again. And a lot of it was when you have a corrupt agency of that magnitude, then it calls for drastic measures. And those are the things that I think they identified and said that they needed to do. So I'm not familiar totally with the remake-up of the organization, but if I'm correct, I know they did have to weed out a lot of people and have everyone basically reapply.
Officer Way, you said earlier that when you were on the force, especially in your earlier years, it was a revolver and 6 bullets or 12 bullets or something like that. Now there are semi-automatic rifles on the street. There are semi-automatic pistols and high capacity magazines. How much does that affect the attitude of police officers when they go out on a call?
A lot of officers, when you respond, like Officer Niven said before, there is nothing routine. You know, I've been to bank robberies and nothing happened. I've been to a alarm and was shot at. You know, you just never know. So for officers, it's always, when you get that call, it's heightened ability. It's like being on DEFCON 5. And then when you get the call, you're at DEFCON 3. You know, your senses go up, you're a little more aware, you're aware of your surroundings, your training kicks in, all those things that you've been through, all those things kick in. So it's just something that is built into officers. You know, even to this day, being retired, there are times when I catch myself still doing some of those same things I was trained on for years. It's built into your system. It becomes a part of your DNA, and you just can't let it go.
Officer Nevins, is policing more dangerous today than it was 10, 20 years ago?
I could say there's more opportunities for it to be dangerous. But I know officers today who've never pulled their gun out of their holster outside of being on the range. You know, so I mean, it's just the scenarios that you're dealt with. For me, I guess we could look at statistics and say, yes, there's more homicides, there's more robberies, there's more of everything, but that comes with the growth. I mean, that's just a growth answer.
Officer Nivens?
I'm kind of on the same page. I don't know that it's more dangerous. I'm not quite sure, but I do know that with the change in population, the change in crime statistics typically increase as well.
We're going to talk about crime in Charlotte during the second half of the program, but right now we're going to go back to Afeni, who's going to give us the results of the survey that our audience has been taking.
Yes, thank you, Glenn. So we're going to switch gears for a moment and discuss the results of the audience survey. Please keep in mind that these results are only based on the audience members who actually completed the survey. So, our first question was, to what extent do you feel protected by the police? We have about 34% majority, slight majority, who selected that they feel somewhat protected. 31% selected that they feel very protected. 25% are neutral on the question. And we have about 9% who said that they do not feel protected at all by the police. Our next question was, what is the most important aspect of effective policing? Here we have about 38% of surveyors who selected that it's a deeper community and resident involvement on behalf of the police. 28% of surveyors selected that extensive training is the most effective aspect of policing, such as implicit bias training and de-escalation training. We have about 19% of surveyors who selected that a more exclusive selection of officers is needed. And then we have about 12% of surveyors, 12 or 13%, who selected that a partnership with community initiatives is the most important aspect of effective policing. And then we have a small percentage, about 3% of surveyors, who said that it's all of the above that's needed. Our next question was, would you prefer a smaller or larger police presence in your neighborhood? As you can see, we have 50% of our surveyors who are neutral on this question, about 34% who selected that they would like a smaller police presence in their neighborhood, and about 16% who selected that they would like a larger police presence. So our final question was an open-ended question for our audience members, and it asked, what does protect and serve mean to you? And as you can see, we have responses such as, it means a group of people dedicated to making our community a better place. Some surveyors said responses such as absolutely nothing. Others said that just what it says, protect the community and serve the people in all communities, including those that are Black or what is always said is underserved. We have another response such as that if something bad has happened, someone will give me a hand. I want someone to assist me if something happens, not someone who is looking for trouble. So Glenn, based on these survey results, was there something that stood out to you or the panelists?
I was very surprised that a larger percentage did not say they wanted a smaller police presence in the community. I expected that. I don't know why I expected that, but these results seem to mirror to some degree what the Pew survey found, that there is no consensus in terms of where we go from here. But I would be interested in hearing what our panelists found interesting as well. Chief?
Yes, I think it was 34%. Is that correct? It said they would like a smaller, or maybe I'm thinking of the wrong slide, but I agree. And I think that what we have to look at, each community is different, and each neighborhood we go into and serve is different. And that's what we need to really focus on as a department, is that we tailor our response. And, I would hope that the communities, not necessarily that when they talk about police presence, what do they mean by that? Do they mean that we're in there making more traffic stops, or making more contacts with individuals, or are we just present and visible in the community to show that we support and that they're safe? So I think that's a big part of it, and that's what we really need to do more of.
Chief Officer Nevins?
I think seeing that, I think it was 34.6% of people wanted, or the most important aspect of the police department to them was deeper community and resident involvement. I was pretty shocked at that, because I assumed that most people would demand that we have more training, because that's typically what I hear. You guys need more training. You need more training. However, I agree that that we do need a deeper community involvement with residents of our community, just because there has been that disconnect and the mistrust between, community members and officers. And I think what needs to happen is to rebuild that trust. We just need to get out with our community more and just make those connections, and just get out with people, speak to people, chat with people. And again, not letting the only time someone speaks with an officer or has a general conversation with an officer be because they dialed 911. That there should be more often times that we don't have to be called just to have a conversation.
Officer Way?
I was really surprised at the 50% that was neutral. It just seems if you talk to people in the neighborhoods, especially in certain communities, as much as they talk about how they do not want the police in their neighborhoods, how the police just come in and harass, and to see that number, it's really kind of shocking, as well as the responses that were given and what the officers needed as far as the training, the communication and those things. Those kind of run along the lines of, if I'm not mistaken, some of those run along the lines of the program that Chief Jennings has already outlined that they're going to cover going forward. So that's actually a good thing on that level. But you know, the thing about statistics is, and when you're dealing with the public, it's all depending on what situation they're dealing with at the moment. And whatever situation they're dealing with, that's how they're going to respond.
This question wasn't on the list that, or this question I'm about to ask was not on the list that you were given, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I think it's just that important. There is a feeling in a lot of communities of color, that police departments are inherently racist. And it's not about training. It's not about community engagement. There is a feeling that police departments, that they were formed. I mean, you all know the history of police departments with a racist intent, slave catchers to capture and return runaway slaves, and that culture permeates police departments today, that Black people are viewed with suspicion. We are not allowed to get away with some of the same things that other communities might get away with. You know, I think if we're going to have an honest discussion tonight, we've got to address that question. And I will let you all address it any way you want to, starting with Chief Jennings.
Well, I've always, that's an excellent opening, and I appreciate you letting me go first on that one. But that is always going to be something that we have to acknowledge as a police department. We say all the time, perception is reality. You know, there's no doubt that the history of the law enforcement profession was based on racism, and there's no doubt that it exists. And we have to be able to get out in front of that, because you're absolutely right. Because if you look at the numbers and the things that we do and how we police in the Black communities, and that's why I said it's important that we know how these communities want us to police them, because there's been so often, and I was guilty of it as a division captain, is you have a high crime area, which predominantly Black neighborhood in the one that I'm referring to. And the answer was, let's arrest our way out of it. Let's go into the neighborhoods and have no tolerance. And if we can arrest someone for jaywalking, let's do it. And let's show people that we're in there trying to make a difference. Well, we weren't making a difference. We were putting people in a vicious cycle to where you arrest them on a minor charge, and now they can't get a job and they have a record, and so we have to take another look at how we do things, and particularly in that aspect of it.
Officer Nevins? The perception that police departments are inherently and perhaps irrevocably racist.
I agree with what Chief Jennings was saying. There's been numerous times in police departments across the country where, yes, I don't want to use the word target, but you focus in on these high crime areas. And then it's almost as if we're creating more issues, especially for the Black community, as Chief was mentioning, because when you do get those minor charges, now we're preventing, someone from getting, a job, or even on minor traffic offenses. Now we're preventing them from getting their license, which then, prevents them from having transportation to work. And then we're stuck in that revolving door. So I do believe that there probably are better ways that we can handle these issues. I'm just not totally sure of how we can move forward.
But even as we talk about better ways of handling these issues, we're hearing demands in our city right now for better and more effective policing along certain corridors, Beatties Ford Road being a prime example. There are calls for tougher policing, zero tolerance for certain activities. How do you balance that, Chief?
Well, you have to look at, it has to be balanced, you're right, but let's go back and historically look at these areas that have long been what we refer to as hotspots for criminal activity, and we've put those methods in place and they haven't worked. We've gone into no tolerance and high visibility and a lot of police activity, and we're still seeing the same thing. I think what we really need to do is stop putting the onus on the police department for the ongoing criminal activity and behavior that we're seeing in these communities. We're just a small part of it, in my opinion. I think what we're seeing with the city now, with some of the programs that we're going to be putting in place that are not necessarily belong to the police, that hold responsibility to the community and other entities within the city. That's where you're going to see success, I think, and you have to be able to provide support where you're given jobs and affordable housing and things like that that will make a difference so that crime is not the norm in some of these locations.
Our homicide rate, and this is a question from someone in our audience, our homicide rate is running currently, I believe, running ahead of last year's pace, which was horrendous.
Yes.
What factors are contributing to that? Do we know, is this gang activity? Chief Putney, before you, used to say that it was about people seeking to solve very simple disputes, very minor disputes by picking up a gun. Is that what we're seeing, or is it deeper than that?
I think it is a lot of that. It can go deeper. If we look back in the early 90s, and Officer Way can tell you that we had an excuse back then. It was the distribution of crack cocaine, and a lot of the homicides that we saw in the early 90s dealt with drug sales and drug transactions. Now when we look at them, they're more all over the map, whether it's domestic violence, whether it is disputes that turn into physical assaults, and there are some drug deals that we're seeing. So the biggest thing is that people are quick to pick up a gun and use that gun to resolve issues, and that is disturbing, because it's not like you can't have an argument anymore, or you can't just have a fist fight or how it used to be. Now people have access to guns, and they're using those guns a lot quicker than what they used to.
Officer Nevins, this question as well is from someone in our audience. As a Black law enforcement officer, how are you viewed, or how do you think you're viewed by members of the African American community here in Charlotte?
So I'd like to go back a few weeks, and we can go back a few years, to where I've been told on the front lines, specifically during protests, etc., you should be on our side. And to me, it's not a pick sides thing. Right is right and wrong is wrong. So I'm not going to pick a side, because it's not like saying being on this side, if you will, being on the police side is right, or being on the police side is wrong, or being on the protest side is right. being on the protest side is wrong. I'm on this side behind this badge and behind these patches to give those that look like me and those that don't look like me a voice. So Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department has a recruiting campaign that says be the difference. And that basically just means be the change that you want to see. There's been times where I've explained to people our hiring process and how they can go on cmpd.org to apply to be the difference. And a lot of times people are very hesitant, like, oh, no, you got it. But, you know, in order to affect change, oftentimes you have to be the change that you want to see. So in terms of how I'm viewed in the community, some people, you know, I've been called an Uncle Tom. And then I've also been, you know, respected because people see that you can look like me and be behind this badge. So I've received both views.
Chief, how closely does the makeup of CMPD mirror the demographics of Charlotte-Mecklenburg? Chief Jennings?
So yes, I'm sorry, I couldn't get unmuted there. So right now, Charlotte-Mecklenburg, the community we serve is about 34% of the 34% in the Black community. We only make up about half of that, about 17% is of our department is Black. And now what we're struggling with is, you know, we in the midst of all of the vilification of the profession and the bad publicity that we get as a profession, in the midst of that, we are losing officers, and we're trying desperately to get more officers, get more people interested in the profession to sign on. Now, with everything that you see in the media and everything that you see going on, you can only imagine how hard it is to convince a young Black officer or a young Black person in the community to come in and join forces with us. It's difficult, but you know, we're going to continue that effort and try to be successful and continue to raise those numbers, not just in the Black community, but the Latino as well.
How are you trying to overcome that obstacle in practical terms? What are some of the things that CMPD is doing to bring in more young Black officers, young Latino officers, whatever?
Over the last couple of years, we've been very intentional about going into the HBCUs and trying to recruit. We started a college internship program last year that we also go into the HBCUs as well to try and we do that as a paid college internship. And we want to make sure that we get people from the communities that we are going to protect to serve, like Officer Nivens is, you know, from Charlotte, that we want to say that as they're at a young age, we need to show you the side of our police department that you might not see in the media. And maybe if that sparks interest and we help facilitate as you grow older and go to college, that we want to make sure we stay in touch so that we can influence you to join our department. Imagine real quickly if each division had 5 or 6 officers in that division that grew up into the communities that they serve, and the difference that those officers could make for that division.
Officer Way, you are a Black man who had a long career in law enforcement. Well, first of all, what attracted you to the profession? And second, if you could do a sales pitch to other Black men, young Black men who might, or women, who might be considering a career in law enforcement, what would you tell them?
My foray into law enforcement was not the conventional one. My father's best friend was the actual sergeant over police recruiting. And he came by the house and saw me, and I told him no. And I kept telling him no. And one day he asked my father for my name, social security number, and date of birth. And he came to my house and said, I have you approved, but I found out I had a hernia. So after the surgery and the wait time, he ended up being the chief over at the Park Rangers. And that's how I ended up at the Park Rangers. And he was instrumental in me leaving the Park Rangers to come to the police department. if I had to talk to anyone young, I could tell them that your career is your career. You can make it, write it, explain it, give a narrative of it the way you want. I could only tell them about my experiences in the neighborhoods I worked in. Growing up here, everyone already knew me. So when someone had a problem, I had the knowledge to say, hey, I know this company that's hiring. Let me give you my business card. Use me as a reference. And when they got the job, now I knew I changed someone's life. The one thing I always knew is that no one in this city could touch more lives than me when I wore that uniform, because that was my goal, was to go out every day and try and change my community's life. And if you want to be a police officer, just know that I don't think any other job will give you that opportunity.
Chief Jennings, one of our members in the audience wants to know, how can the community be involved in changing CMPD, or involved in the conversation about making CMPD more effective?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is get to know us. We say all the time, it's hard to hate up close. And so a lot of times when it can be frustrating at times, but it's also understandable that when you start hearing feedback from the community and things that we need as a police department, you start hearing things that are thrown out that we already do, or that we've already put in place. And so it just kind of tells you that people will say things without getting educated on what the police department is all about. But I think the biggest thing that you can do in the community as well is start forcing your way into getting to know those officers that patrol your street. Go to your division office, introduce yourself. And I say we can't, don't just wait on an officer to be the one to approach you and to talk with you. If you see an officer, wave at them, talk to them, and start those conversations. And then there's other involvements, our police ambassadors program, which is geared towards having people that can serve in the community when we have rough times, like you've seen on Beatty's Ford Road, or the riots and protests and things like that they can help serve and give our message out as far as who we are and what we do on the police department as well.
Chief Putney used to say often that if you have trouble with an officer, don't settle it in the street. And the implication was you're going to lose that. Go through the official channels. But it seems that in many instances, even when there is substantial evidence that a police officer engaged in misconduct, we've seen officers literally on video shooting people in the back who were running away in North Charleston. A jury did not convict that officer. So if we can't get justice when we have that kind of evidence and someone is killed, why should we believe we would get justice if an officer is abusive, or says something racist, or engages in some other form of misconduct? Why should we believe that we would get justice by going through official channels?
Yeah, I mean, and I certainly understand that. You see the history of things where that appear to be obvious and cut and dry, and then at the same time, there is no accountability for that. And what I've told people is, when you start talking about, a jury doesn't convict an officer or something, they're charged, but there's no conviction. That's a system issue. When we can do only so much as the police department. I can charge an officer for a crime and put them through the system, and they go through their due process, and they can be found not guilty, just like an average citizen can, which also happens. But when you do that, you lose the trust in the community. And I think that the message needs to be that that the best way to predict an outcome or to hope for the outcome that you need is to, like you said, you're not going to win in the streets. You're going to have to go through it. Beautiful thing with the body worn cameras now that show the actions of our officers. And I think you have to just be able to put some trust into that, even though historically we've seen that that doesn't always come out the way you would want it to.
We have time for one more question. I'm going to throw this question out to all of you. If you could give me a brief answer. Where do we go from here? And if you could look into a crystal ball, do you think we are on the cusp of meaningful change in how American cities, especially Black communities, are policed?
Yeah, I'll be brief. Yes, I think we are. I think the message is clear. People are being heard, and it's not short term. This is long term at this point. Where do we go go from here? Is we have to start working together, and we can't be divisive. Let's join together and move forward from this point.
Officer Way.
For me, it's two-sided sword. Both parties have to be willing to listen to what the other party is saying, and they have to be willing to say the things that need to be said, no matter how it may hurt, how it may not sound right. I think once both parties get everything out on the table, then you can work toward a clear resolution. But right now, I don't see, there's no reason why. I mean, the road's wide open. It could be done.
Okay, Officer Nivens. Do you think we're on the cusp of real change in how cities and communities are policed? And where do you think we go from here?
I do believe that we're very, very close to change. And Chief Jennings said it best himself, with community collaboration. I believe that that's where we have to begin. And just as well as, I've told officers to, get out there and speak with the community. Again, as Chief Jennings said, the community should be open to speaking with us too. I understand that a lot of people are afraid to initiate that conversation with officers. Oftentimes, we may seem kind of cold shouldered, and it's more than likely due to the fact that we're, on our way to another call. So we ask that, the public doesn't take it personally, but you see me in your neighborhood and you want to speak, and I have the time, I'll be more than glad to chat with you. So I do believe that, with starting with community collaboration, we can move forward towards change.
And with that, we're going to have to call it an evening. On behalf of the Gantt Center, I want to thank you each for joining us today. Thank you, Officer Nivens. Thank you for being on the program.
Thank you.
And Officer Wade, thank you as well. And Chief Jennings, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. As always, we want to thank the Harvey B. Gantt Center for hosting this event. The Gantt Center, as I always say, is a jewel in the Charlotte community. Without the Gantt Center, we would not be having this conversation. So we always want to support those institutions that support our interests in our communities. So I'm going to go turn it back over to Athene, who's going to talk to you about how you can support the Gantt Center and help it remain the vital entity that it is in our community. Athene?
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you for your thoughtful words, and thank you for moderating tonight's conversation. During these challenging times, the Gantt Center is truly proud to be a platform for conversations that reflect our community. Your support allows us to expand our efforts to engage the voices of those whose perspectives are needed the most. Our Text to Give platform is one of many ways that you can support us. By texting Unmasked to 345-345, you are part of an ecosystem that supports artists and creatives, but also continues our work as an anchor in the community as well. A special thank you to all who joined tonight's conversation. We look forward to seeing you next week, Tuesday at 7 p.m., as we talk transformative justice in the city of Charlotte. As always, please be safe and take care. Good night.